Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with another episode of the weekly wrap up where we tell you what's been happening on the Yakking Show this week and what's going to be happening next week. But we can never start an episode without introducing co host Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thanks.
Good. Well, let's get straight into it. We don't need to waffle about the weather. And let me tell you that we had an interesting guest published on Tuesday, and that was Pat Wetzel. And Pat is the author of the book Bump in the Road. She's had a very extreme life of adversity in many ways, but you need to watch the episode or listen to the episode to get the detail. And she has a very unusual hobby. And again, you need to look at the episode or listen to it to get that. But she talks about overcoming literally bumps and metaphorically bumps in the road. And she interviews people on her podcast who've overcome severe adversity. So, a really inspiring episode. If you need an uplifting, watch Pat's episode. And she's written a book, as I said, and there will be a link to that book on in the newsletter. This week we have Fiona Demark, all the way from Australia, and she is an inspirational speaker. She's a resilience coach. She has a certain physical disabilities, which she's overcome remarkably well, and she organizes adventures for people that are disabled in some way. And she also has a very unusual hobby, and I'm not going to give that one away, but you need to watch that show, and you'll find that one particularly inspiring as well. So we've mentioned the book that we're featuring this week. We have a number of other very interesting guests coming up. Just to give you a quick heads up that the week after Fiona, we'll have Patrick Dawson, and he talks about living minimally, minimalist living, and he's got quite a story to tell, and he does that himself now. Following that is Terry Tucker. He's a motivational guy. He's had a wide range of careers and overcome challenges himself, but he's again very inspiring person. And then the week after that will be Christine Vaughan Davis, who is a Presbyterian minister, but she is a hospital chaplain and a spiritual director. And another inspire. So we got a whole lineup of really inspiring people coming up for you. So that's it for the people who are coming along. Then instead of a normal health tip, we were going to discuss something that Kathleen and I have somewhat different views on. And we thought it might be interesting for you to hear our different views. And that is the whole topic of PTSD and the treatment of PTSD. So, Kathleen, do you want to carry on?
Well, Peter, before we get into that, let me just go through my feline tidbit for today.
Of course. Yeah, let's do that.
And for those of you who are feline lovers, just like as I am, here's today's tidbit. In Japan, tortoiseshell cats are considered lucky, particularly the rare male ones. Only 1 in 3,000 are males. Did you know that?
I knew they were predominantly female. I didn't know the ratio. Yeah.
And I
One in
believe only
3,000.
calico cats are only female,
Calico, and that's what I've heard. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ah,
It is.
anyway.
It is indeed. It is. It is. So,
But
um, I
that's
can
that's for
imagine
fun.
one male in 3,000 females. He could be suffering from a little bit of PTSD, but that's sorry, that's just way my mind works. So let's get into our debate. So, do you want to start off, Kathleen?
Well, you go ahead, and then I'm going to chime in with my thoughts because
Okay.
let everybody know what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, so here's my thoughts, and it was triggered by the guest that we interviewed this week, who will be coming up in July. Her episode will be published in July, and she suffered from a number of traumas as a youngster,
Mhm.
and was diagnosed with PTSD. And she went through an experimental treatment to help her. And I'm not going to go into that right now. You've got to
Mhm.
wait for the episode, but that got Kathleen and me talking about it afterwards. And I'm old school, as you can see from my rugged face and grey hair, and served in the military in Rhodesia. And PTSD in those years was unheard of. We heard stories of shell shock from the two great wars. We weren't involved in Korea at all, so we didn't have any evidence of that. And things were at times pretty bad in our little terrorist war. It was nowhere near the scale of Vietnam, but many people were killed, some very badly maimed. People were blinded. My own mother was uh, had her shot in an ambush and was handicapped, couldn't use her right leg for the rest of her life. And of course, my father was killed in a subsequent terrorist ambush. And we were sort of taught to, well, You've just got to get on with it and get over it and get on with your life. And honestly, not many people in Rhodesia went nuts through what they went through. And then much later, we had the farm invasions, more recently, and that was bad. And one or two guys did get mentally unstable. That one in particular, horrific circumstances, which I won't go into, and he never came back to normal. But just about everyone else got on with their lives. We lost everything. We lost our farms, lost our homes. I came to Canada. Some stayed, were able to stay. Others have gone all over the world, and many have never recovered financially, many living in virtual poverty, but they've got on with it. And we don't use the term PTSD. So that's my take. Am I being harsh? Probably. I have a lot of sympathy for people who are suffering. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're victims or anything else, but I have a suspicion that our society has made a thing out of PTSD that encouraged some people to stay in a state of victimhood. That is my big concern, right? So maybe I'm harsh. Kathleen, over to you.
Well, Peter, you said something very important. You said back in the time that you were in the military, it was unheard of. Well, it was unheard of. People
Yeah,
didn't talk about it, but it doesn't mean it didn't exist. It
sure,
existed. It's always existed. It's just that it was never defined as it is today. And people now, experts now, recognize this as a real issue. And Peter, everyone is different in how they handle trauma.
sure.
You may have been very resilient in how you've been able to overcome it and to carry on with life. As you said, you got on with it, right? Partly because of your personality, partly because of your upbringing. But at the same time, Peter, when we talk about trauma, it doesn't mean that you weren't affected by it. I mean, case in point, sometimes, the issues end up in the tissues,
Hmm.
right? So some of that trauma may have manifested itself through through your physical ailments. And as you know, as you've been very open with everybody about your heart condition that you've had, and who's to say? I'm not saying that that's exactly what's happened to you. I'm just saying it could be it's a possibility. And I think we tend to downplay and think, yeah, we can't downplay PTSD. It's done a heck of a number on not just our soldiers, but there's a lot of people out there that have experienced different traumas in life through abuse, just various traumas and we can't just say that they're victims and they're playing victims when they're having to deal with what they're dealing with. And I know you disagree, but that's my take anyways, Peter.
No,
I
I hear you. I hear you, and I'm not totally disagreeing with you. And as I said, I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for those people who struggle with it. What I'm trying to say is that from my own experience, far fewer people struggled so desperately with it then, 40, 50 years ago, than seem to now. And I know it's getting more publicity. I know it's more widely recognized in the medical community. And maybe we were an isolated community because we were late to get TV, for instance, because of sanctions. We didn't get American movies.
Mhm.
We didn't get a lot of the luxuries that people in the first world got. We had a good life in many ways, climate and everything else. Most families were probably more affluent than the average family in the West right now. But there were not a lot of luxuries, not a lot of distractions, not a lot of toys, and kids were taught to be responsible. And then we had the military service, my generation. So after that, people got on with their lives and work. What I'm trying to say is that people seem to be less affected. Yes, I know it was less well known, but not many people seem to suffer as badly as people do now. And I would
I think
love to find
that's,
the answer for that.
you know what, Peter, probably it's because people didn't talk about it. And so, from your perspective, it wasn't as prevalent. And that's all.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that it wasn't as prevalent as it is today. It just wasn't talked about. And people didn't share the trauma that they were experiencing or the effect it had on them. They looked like they were carrying on, but maybe they weren't inwardly. Maybe behind closed
I
doors,
maybe,
it was
maybe,
a different situation.
possibly, possibly, and some drank too much. We had, from what I know and what I heard and what medical people told me, we had less child abuse and less intermarital violence than is the case in the current, right now in society. Again, we could argue that that was not visible because people didn't talk about it, but doctors, the ones I spoke to, didn't seem to experience it. Maybe it was a generational thing, although I believe that both of those abuses have been bad for years in many parts of the world. I'm just saying maybe our environment was self-selective, that people couldn't cope with our environment, left, right? Because there was no social security, there was no unemployment, workman's compensation for mainly for us working people. So people who couldn't handle that went back to welfare state in Britain or on the continent.
Mhm.
So what I'm saying is maybe we were somewhat unique. Our community was somewhat unique in that people who might have suffered from PTSD tended to leave the environment. I don't know, but there seems to be something that I really believe helped us survive that is not helping people in the modern world survive. And I wish I could find out that secret. I agree part of it is less publicity. People didn't talk about it. That could well be quite a lot of it. But I still believe there's something on top of that. And I'd like to get you respond to that, and then we'll mention the one factor that our guest on Tuesday mentioned, which could be have
Go ahead.
relevance.
Go ahead.
Our guest on Tuesday used the term empathetic. When I asked her, much like I've been talking to Kathleen now, her
Mhm.
thoughts, she came up with the term empathetic witness. And she said the way many people get over PTSD and the effects of any form of trauma is to have an empathetic witness, right?
Mhm.
So my response to that was, well, just maybe because we're in the armies, we were all in it together. We were all one another's empathetic witnesses. And she said, quite possibly. And when we went through the problems on the farms, when we were losing our farms, it happened to all our neighbors and the whole farming community. 5,500 farmers lost their farms. So over 3 years, it affected all of us. So we heard about it happening to others. We experienced it. We told others, and we shared those stories. And she said that could be a huge reason why many of you got through it relatively unscathed, relatively unscathed. I'm not saying I got through it completely unscathed, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So I think that's relevant. I think that if you're
Absolutely.
going through this with other people, you have a
Well,
much better
I
chance
mean,
of surviving.
absolutely. And that's why a lot of veterans end up going to legions and associating
Sure.
with other veterans and they talk about what, their experience while they were in the army and their service, and because they're around people that can relate to their own experience. So
Yeah.
that makes absolute sense, if
Hmm.
you're all helping each other get through it, basically. So yeah.
Sure.
Mhm.
And I know that I wasn't completely unscathed because when I first came to Canada, bearing in mind that for much of the time in my life in Rhodesia and South Africa and in Zimbabwe, I carried a gun on my belt most of the time. Um, and things were violent. So when I first came to Canada, I wasn't able to carry a gun, obviously. And on a few occasions, when I was working on a farm, and I can remember one in particular when somebody in the barn in winter, when we were doing maintenance, dropped a big piece of metal on the ground and made a huge bang. And I was diving for cover and looking for my gun, just automatic reaction. It happened a few times. And I was on the motorbike on the farm road and saw a crowd of workers further up. And my immediate reaction was, "Where's my gun?" Because they're probably trying to shoot me or pull me off my motorbike. So that stayed with me for, it's gone, more or less completely gone now. I think I still react to loud bangs a little bit, but that was huge when I first came here. And I was always looking for potential hazards everywhere in the when I was driving, when I was on the motorbike, when I was walking, always very observant, expecting something to happen. So yeah, so there was an effect on me for sure.
Absolutely.
Anyway, that was our little discussion. So
Yes.
Kathleen and I will continue to disagree
Well,
politely
I
and,
don't
and
know if
in
we
a friendly way.
completely
No,
disagree. I mean, I
it's
think we have diverging opinions.
I think on the extent rather than the fact of whether there is or I don't deny that there's PTSD. Don't get me wrong. I believe there is. I'm concerned that people's ability to handle it in a general sense has diminished over the years, and I'd like to know why. And I believe our current I think a couple of generations of helicopter parents for a start, not allowing kids to take risks, not allowing kids to hurt themselves. I think that's part of it. Entitlement. I think it's complicated, but I think it's a function of the way society has moved. Anyway,
Possibly.
those are
Absolutely.
my thoughts. So we haven't given a health tip as such, but as always, we take Dr. Morse's herbal remedies. Kathleen takes more than I do, but we endorse them. We think that they're really effective, and I'm certainly on a natural medicine kick. I've got off most all of my original prescribed medicines. I'm not saying you should get off yours. You need to talk to your doctor first, but I've made the decision to take charge of my own health, and I am feeling better than I have for many, many years. So Dr. Morse's products are good stuff. That's
Absolutely.
it.
I swear by them too. So, thank you so much for joining us today. If anyone is interested in being a guest on our show, please visit us at theyakkingshow.com. Please click on the contacts tab where you will find a short application form, and we'd love to hear from you. So until next week, take care, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.